Hello and welcome to today's episode of Dream Business, Dream Life. Today I'm joined by the lovely Carrie Eddins. Carrie is a self-taught holistic PR expert. She is one of the most joyous people to be around. She's fun and super knowledgeable too. Hi Carrie, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you?
Hi, Emma. Oh, I'm so delighted to be here after been fangirling your podcast for a while. So it feels like a bit surreal to be on your podcast today.
Super excited. Super excited. Okay, as I do, we're going to dive straight into this. But before we go and explore your growth journey, let's start by telling our listeners a little bit more about what you do now, and then we can reverse engineer it. We can look at what got you to there. So over to you.
Oh, yeah, lovely. Thanks, Emma. So what I do now is I work typically with like trailblazing visionary experts and entrepreneurs. They're usually female, just purely because how I work, because I work quite intuitively, and some of the men they'd want it to be a bit more logical. And I help these people be seen and heard in the media in a way that grows their impact, their influence, and their income.
Amazing. And you do the PR different, don't you, to other people? Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I might be good if I sort of share a story. So one of this a sort of a story of like one of my most phenomenal results, which was when I've been doing this for like about 8 years. So early on in my journey, in 2018, I was working with this lovely lady called Annabelle Kay, and she is a GDPR expert and an employment lawyer. And I said, Annabelle, this is what we're going to do. I said, clear your diary in the launch week of GDPR week in May 2018. I said, clear your diary. Just trust me. I've got a really good instinct about this. I know it's going to work. She's like, really, Carrie? And I'm like, yeah, right, please do this. And so she did. She trusted me. And on the Monday morning, this is when Twitter was like a really, really big deal. This is where like about 95% of the media are on Twitter. Now, obviously, it's X, and I'd say about like 80% of the media. So it's, 70 to 80. It depends on what a certain president says, but it's not as popular as it used to be. It's still popular, but then it was like everybody and his dog and their cat and their pig down the road were on Twitter. So I was on Twitter on Monday morning, like as I was at the time. I was spending like 16 to 18 hours a day on Twitter. And I was like, boop, so I saw this media request come up, hashtag journal request on Twitter. They still do it on X. And I was like, right, this is it. And it was asking for a GDPR expert. So I tweeted back, emailed, I tweeted and emailed I DM'd the producer for the BBC Radio 5 Live show. And like within minutes, she was on the radio. And I admit I was lucky because she's a very articulate, coherent, clearly spoken, confident, hysterical person who can translate really complex things into like humorous, interesting, easy for people to understand kind of words, which for GDPR was a dream at the time. So she went on the radio because most people were like, "Oh, I don't get it," and that week, Annabelle was on BBC Radio 9 times. So it wasn't just BBC Radio 5 Live, it was BBC Radio 4, BBC Radio Wales, BBC Belfast, BBC Radio Scotland. I think there was a couple of others I can't remember, but there was 9 different individual shows. Then she was invited whilst she was on the radio because I'd been really trying at that point to get her on one of my clients on TV, and I had the TV call me, and they were like, "We'd like Annabelle to come on BBC Breakfast in 2 days," and I was like, "Okay." And then they were ringing me like, "We'd like her to come on BBC News," and she didn't not only go on the news BBC News once, she went on twice because they actually had her back. They called her back in, and they did the same with BBC Breakfast. So she was on at like 10 to 8, and she was so good they had her on again at 10 to 9. So she's effectively on that week TV, BBC TV 4 times, the BBC Radio 9 times. Now that was just on an instinct. I broke all the classic PR rules. I just was like, no, I'm just going to, because most PR firms had kind of they've done it all. They've kind of given up, and I just trusted my intuition, and that has by far been my best results in terms of like wins in a week. But that is very different to a lot of other PRs. They would have not done it like that. They would have logically planned and like planned ahead. And another example is my client Sally Baker, who is a senior therapist, and she's a largely relationship and trauma therapist. When we started to work together, she was my first client, and I said to her, because she'd written a book, 7 Steps to changing your relationship with food, and the book about emotional eating, how to stop emotional eating. And her publisher at the time was kind of just getting her to talk about eating issues. And I said, Sally, if you really, really, really want to do this, we need to just look at therapizing everything. And it had no evidence to say that this was work. This was purely an instinct. Well, like, 6 or 7 or maybe 8 years later, in the last 18 months, Sally has been on national TV like 28 times, national radio 25 times. That's just in the last year. She gets regularly headhunted for newspaper articles and magazines and things like that. But that was through how I was kind of orchestrating it, but intuitively. I wasn't like sitting down and creating like logical things. I was like, no, we're going to follow this, and we're going to follow that. And she played along with me, thankfully.
Amazing, amazing. And I think sometimes we need to trust our intuition, don't we? And I
Yeah.
think we fight so hard sometimes to not trust it because there's no logical thing to back it up.
Yeah.
I know when I've done something that intuitively something has just said, just do it, Emma, and see what happens. They normally turn out to be the best things, whether it's from a fun point of view, from a growth point of view, or from an enjoyment point of view, or from a connections point of view. The things where I just say, I don't know why, I just feel I need to do this, they tend to be the things that work out best. Our intuition. It's pretty clever, isn't it?
It's pretty
Pretty
clever.
clever.
It's the best Google ever, really. It's just we
It
just
is.
got to learn to sit with it and listen and go. But yeah, and it's we've all got it. It's just a muscle, like going to the gym, isn't it? You just need to practice doing it.
To
It's
learn
not
how to do it.
certain people. It's like everybody can do it.
Exactly. And people working with you can allow your intuition to take control, can't they? And they have to trust you, and then you can trust your intuition to be able to get them the results. And with they wow, those the tourist clients you've just spoken through, they are results, aren't they? They are absolutely amazing results. And I think it's worth pointing out that, that isn't just because you put something in. I'm assuming you've been working with these people to get them to a point where when they go on the radio, when they go on the television, that they do and say the right things.
Well, I mean, quite honestly, with Annabelle, she's such a she's such a strong communicator. It wasn't really, I didn't really need to do that much. So, for example, even before we were working together, this is the story how we started to work together. I was in this mastermind with these mentors, and she was one of their clients. And this is when I was literally just I was because at the time um, I was extremely financially strapped, so I couldn't afford some of the databases, because you like as professional PRs and bigger agencies, you can buy databases like for 3 to 5 thousand pounds a year, so you can get access to it. I
Mhm.
didn't have that, so I was using Twitter as my I'm going to find this. So I was just literally looking at all these things, and because at the time I didn't. Annabelle was the only person who was making sense to me about GDPR, and I still probably don't, if I'm really honest, still don't really fully understand it because
That's what we have experts for, to tell us what we need to do.
it's still confusing to somebody like me. And one of her quotes was, GDPR is a process, not a deadline. So it was just before we started to work together properly. And I kind of was like, I'm just going to tweet it out, put some hashtags in. And then I suddenly got this like message from Annabelle on Facebook. She was like, Carrie, have you contacted BBC Radio 4 Moneybox program for me? And I was like, no, no, no. And she was like, well, that's really weird because they just invited me to go on a panel with like the information commissioner and all these people to talk about GDPR. And I was like, not guilty, not guilty. And then we traced it back because I was at that point, I was tweeting like, I don't know, 100, 200, 300 times. I was just, I was really
Uh-huh.
doing a lot of tweeting because that was my main thing. And I traced it back and I tweeted that tweet. I didn't forgot that I was like newsjacking, I suppose,
Uh-huh.
was how I sort of developed this technique of directly newsjacking on Twitter with quotes on Twitter to the media. And they just saw that tweet and they invited us straight away. And she was like, I I think we need to start working together, Carrie. And I was like, all right then, like, but that's how it started. It was literally like I didn't even think about it. And that was kind of how it started, which is quite interesting, isn't it, really? Because she was like, and then like before, I can't remember if it was before the BBC breakfast or after, like the BBC loved her so much, it must have been after that. There was a few times once when she went to the Excel Centre at a like I think it was like an accountex or something.
Uh-huh.
She's on the stage and the BBC contacted her and said, we're in the Radio 4 car, we're in the car park, we'd like to interview you. And like she did that. And another time they got when she was on the Thames in London, they were like, we're waiting for you in the car park, and she had to get off a boat to speak to them because she made so much sense. So I obviously it's right person, right place, right time, but she did bring a lot because she was very articulate. I mean, I did and Sally is articulate and she was articulate at the start, but I did media train her.
Uh-huh.
Annabelle was like an exception. I didn't really need to media train her.
Well, that
Um,
is the exception, isn't it? Because
that's the
most
exception, but
people, yeah,
most people, they need some media training because we kind of, when we're in this, and even I need media training, we all do, because it's kind of, we forget that what we're in a level of expertise, and Joe Public don't really get that. They're like, what does that mean? Oh, I'm not in that entrepreneurial world or
mhm,
coaching world, you know. So most people do need a bit of training.
absolutely, absolutely. So, what got you to the point of what got you on Twitter? What got you to the point where you were like, I'm going to do PR?
What got me to the point was that I was working with this couple. I'm just about to hiccup, excuse me. um, in this mastermind, and I was doing like connection marketing is what I kind of called it. I was
Uh-huh.
like doing little storytelling, and I'd kind of created courses about how to storytell to women, how to communicate to women, but it's differently to communicating to men. And nothing was landing. It was all like really like data was leading everything. It was like so nothing was working. And this couple said, well, why don't you do PR, Karen? I was like, I'd I'd always done a little bit and bobs over the years, but I'd never really done it professionally.
Yeah,
So that kind of, and so I was like, oh well, I might as well give it a whirl. I've got nothing else to lose, you know. And so I just started it, and then I realised that I could do it quite easily, um, which was it's a bit of a surprise to me because I hadn't really considered it.
yeah, yeah. But I suppose if you haven't trained specifically to do that or to sat there and thought, vision board or whatever else and thought, do you know what, I'm going to become a PR expert,
Yeah,
sometimes these things just happen. Again, it's probably intuition, isn't it? It's somebody somewhere is saying, this is where we need to place you, this is where you need to be, and to follow that path. So what were you doing before that? What was your growth journey to get you to the point where you were an entrepreneur? Have you always been an entrepreneur?
I've been an entrepreneur for. Somebody asked me that the other day. 21 years mostly. So I've had a
Uh-huh.
few little bits of jobs in between, but mostly it's been yeah. Because I've done confidence coaching with women. I've done marketing coaching. I've done healing. I've done kind of all kinds of different things really. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. And I suppose all of those skills help you with the job you do now, don't they? Because a lot of the people you
operating.
work with, yeah,
Yeah, copywriting as well. I'm just remembering. Yeah, yeah. All kind of. It's weird, isn't it? How you look back and it all kind of goes, oh, that's why I need that bit. I need that bit. I need that bit. It all kind of blends together, doesn't it? It all.
absolutely. Whatever we do in life, whether it's in a job or in some sort of business, we learn skills, don't we? And we pick things up, and all of those things are transferable to other situations, aren't they? So I think it's really important that we don't lose touch of all of the stuff that we've done before.
Yeah,
Personally,
that's true.
personally, yeah, I think so. I think so. So what would you say from a PR perspective? What do you think stops people from getting themselves in the media? Because some people have a fear of it, don't they? So what do you think that is? What stops people doing that?
I mean, for me, there's a number of things because it's kind of like people don't. I think for me, the prominent thing right now is that people don't feel that they're safe to go into the media. They feel like it's more safe to post on, you know, in what we call echo chambers, whether it's in particular pods in communities on WhatsApp or their own communities or on their own email list, or even now with this the Facebook algorithm, you know, it's much more limited, isn't it?
Hmm.
So I think there's people don't feel safe because they just feel they're going to get trolled like a celebrity or a politician, which
Yeah.
really most of the time they're not. Obviously, there are exceptions. They're all generally, but I mean, I think it's about safety. But I feel like there's this sense, particularly with women, about when they go into the media, they've got to be, there's this fear that they've got to be perfect, they need to be a certain weight or have their hair done or look a certain way or be a certain age or have all their ducks in a row, everything looking perfect online and everywhere. And so they keep putting it off until they've got their website sorted or they've sorted their hair out or they've lost 10 pounds or there's that. I see that a lot with women. And I just think, sometimes you just got to do it. You're never going to be fully ready in that situation. And then the other thing that I really am noticing more and more is that women say they want it and then they're like, I've done it, they've done enough and they've got the experience enough, but they're still holding themselves back. And I think they're afraid of their own voice, they're afraid of their own power, they're afraid of their own impact, yet they really, really want it. So this is kind of disconnect. Um, which is why I've created like a process, an embodiment process to help them to do that, to become their own kind of um, like cheerleader, because it's kind of like they're not backing themselves fully because they say they want it, but then they're like it's like a stop start on the um, at the door, and it's really it's just it's their logical mind holding them back.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of that stuff you just said is quite interlinked, isn't it? If you think of if if it's like typical examples, my hair needs doing, or for me, I'd be like, oh, my roots need doing, or could just do with losing a few pounds. We say that all of the time, don't we? And
We
it
do.
really is just a I'm going to use the word excuse, which sounds really harsh, but it's an excuse for not trusting ourselves, isn't it, and our own
Yeah.
capabilities sometimes. And also, the fear of people trolling, because that is a thing, isn't it? Whether that's in the
It's
media or
very
online, that
it's
is a
true.
thing that does happen. But as you say, although we hear about those cases and those cases are absolutely shocking, most people probably don't get that on their content that gets shared in the media. Most
No,
people,
they
I
don't.
imagine. Yeah.
I was on a PR panel with Fiona Harold and Joe Swan at Andrea Rainsford Shine event recently, and somebody in the audience said, how do I control the narrative if I go in the press? And I said, well, if you want to go in the press, you've got to understand you're not going to control the narrative.
Hmm.
You're not. You can, and even if you did, like, say to the journalist, like, say it was a written feature, or we want you to make sure that has certain things, you say certain things and certain things are edited out. 9 times out of 10, that is possible. It's not always possible. Some of them, the editor might say, well, actually, if they want the story, we need to do this.
Yeah, yeah.
But then, you can't control all the comments in the Daily Mail or the Sun. You can't control how people are ever going to perceive you because you went in the particular newspaper or wherever you went. And so, again, that goes back to your relationship with yourself and trusting yourself, and not what you're saying, and backing yourself, no matter what the outcome of this particular piece of media coverage, and no matter what people's response is, what you think of you and what you feel about you is the most important thing. Everything else is like icing on the cake. You are the cake, is what I kind of say to my clients. I'm like,
Oh, that suits me. I can eat
I know
myself. How yummy. How absolutely yummy. And I think that thing that we hear people say all of the time, don't read the comments, because people are very good at putting the nasty stuff on there, aren't they? So the
yeah,
chances are what you're going
keyboard
to see is
warriors.
the
Yeah,
nasty stuff rather than the nice complimentary stuff. So it's not going to boost your ego or your confidence. It's more likely to pull it down. So I think that statement of just don't read the comments is totally, something that is 100% worth doing. I know that when I hosted my first growth event back in October 2023, it feels like it was only yesterday, but it's a couple of years ago now. That got into the press, into the local press, because I hosted my first event because it was in Becky's memory, partly because she was always business minded. So that went out into the press. And it didn't go out the way that I wanted it to go out. I wanted it to be more of a celebration, and they focused a lot more on the loss side of it. But
yeah,
some of the comments, everybody kept saying to me, "Don't." This was only local press, by the way. It wasn't anything, national or anything like that. Some of the comments, everybody saying, don't read the comments, don't read the comments. And some of the comments, it was just like, what is wrong with these people? I stopped reading the comments at that point because I thought this isn't going to make me feel any better. And it
No,
doesn't
it's not.
change the fact that, what we did was a good thing, not a they weren't saying the event was a negative thing. They were it was all stupid comments about, she would never have had cancer if she hadn't had the COVID jab and all of that sort of political stuff that came in. Nobody actually asked the question if she'd had the COVID jab, but hey, we're not going to go
But
over
they're
that
not going to
again.
be reasonable. They'll be totally
There was no, it
unreasonable.
was like literally on really silly political silly stuff that was going on in the comments. So I think that don't read the comments is absolutely the right thing to do. It's not about not going
Absolutely.
in the press because that could happen. It's about just saying to yourself, actually, just don't read the comments. Because it's always the silly people, isn't it?
It is, and I remember like this is years ago, listening to like I don't know if it was listening on a radio show or a television show, and it was like some kind of A-list celebrity was saying that like, well, I know there's lot of people love me, a lot of people hate me, but the people who really matter to me, I can count on one hand. They're like, those are the people's comments I care about. The rest, it's a bonus or a discard. And I remember thinking, that's really quite clever, isn't it? It's kind of, and they're saying that that keeps me grounded, no matter what film or what award they win. They were saying that like that is a way to keep them grounded. I just now even I think that's even more kind of grounded common sense.
Absolutely. We certainly shouldn't let other people's nastiness, unkindness stop us from doing the things that we feel intuitively or from a growth point of view are the right things for us to do for ourselves and our business. I know it sounds super easy to do that,
It
but
sounds
we
super
shouldn't.
easy, yeah.
Yeah, and
Especially when we're triggered, because I think this is the other thing. It's kind of like if if because I just remember like this was again probably when I was starting out, and I did this offer to go to this media summit in New York. So I did like this crazy deal, and like this one lady who was gonna we were talking about working together, and she was helping women who'd been through domestic violence. And I said, oh, okay. I said, so what's your story? And she said, I didn't want to share my story. And I said, why don't you want to share your story? Because she was still in the trauma response. She still had unprocessed trauma. And I said, well, yeah, no, we don't want to share that. But the thing is, if you're going to work with something like domestic violence or domestic abuse, you're going to go and want to go to the media and talk about it. They are going to ask you your story. Where's the connection? And if you don't want to offer it, which I understand why you don't, then it will lessen the impact. So I actually said it's probably not a good idea to work together because we'll only ever get so far. Because at some point, an investigative journalist will come up and go, "We really want to know why you're connected with this topic." Um, because it will just have greater impact,
course, yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
if people have got unprocessed trauma about a story or even an opinion, I don't personally advocate or recommend that they go to the media about it until they've processed it and nobody's ever not triggered, but you're managing your triggers. Because if you go to the
exactly.
press about it, it's gonna trigger you on steroids. It will just, it's salt in the wound. It's a shit ton of salt, excuse my French, in
Exactly,
the wound, and we
absolutely.
have
And
them.
that's going to come stingy. That is going to be very stingy. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and
I remember Danny Wallace, I think it was, saying years ago, she probably still says it now, but always saying that, going onto stages, and I suppose it's the same from a PR point of view, you should always talk from the scar, not the wound. And I think
absolutely.
that's really important, isn't it? If it's still painful, if you've still got unhealed trauma in there or trauma that you're unable to manage properly yet because you haven't got past, definitely not the time to talk about it, is it? Because you're going to come from a different perspective, aren't you? I absolutely know you're going to, and I know that from personal experience. I've been asked a few times to, to share stories from losing Becky and everything else, and I haven't done it, and I've chosen not to do it because I just know that it's still a wound, it's not a scar, and I know that it's not going to come across in the way that it would be needing to come across. I absolutely know that it would help other people, my journey and everything else would help other people, but it's not going to help people if they
It has to
hear
help
it's
you
too
first.
emotional.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and it's kind of
Yeah,
this is where the because I love Brené Brown, I got massive respect for her. I've read quite a few of her books, but this is where the vulnerability hangover. It's like it kind of, and only you will know where there's the right
yeah,
place, like you're saying. So because the vulnerability hangover is when like you're saying, you're sharing it, and there's a wound, not a scar, and it's like, yeah, it can help people, but first of all, is it helping you? No.
No,
It's
no.
just
And I think
away from the mic.
your responses are going to be different, aren't they, when you're able to talk from a logical perspective than when you're talking from an ouchie, this hurts type thing.
Yeah.
So I think, that's a big thing, isn't it? But I think it's also important to talk about, PR, getting in the press, isn't always got to be about something bad or traumatic that's happened. And I think a lot of people think that I haven't got a story that's strong enough, that's sad enough, that's traumatic enough to be able to get myself into the press. And I think your examples of your clients that you gave, they were both from a work expert point of view.
Yeah, because I think for me, and there's lots of different definitions, but my simplest definition of um, publicity is it's part storytelling, part opinion sharing. Now, the stories are often a much more personal in nature, like you say, they're a bit more dramatic and everything. But the opinion sharing, everybody's got an opinion. You can share opinions about your private, things in your private life or in your professional life. And for me, that's a far easier way to get started and build your profile and your authority and credibility in the media than just focusing on your personal story. And I'm not. I think both are good, but I think people underestimate their professional opinion so much. And like with that, what they do is that they overlook. They kind of go more for the mainstream press and they overlook the B2B or trade press, which is what I've been doing masterclasses about recently. Because it's like it's a very lucrative form of a section of the media which is only growing. Mainstream press is reducing in nature because of budgets and AI and all kinds of stuff. The B2B press or the trade press is growing, which is where you've got like you can go in like your industry, specific industry to you, or an industry that you'd like to be known for. And you can pick multiple industries, but it's just going to be a more concentrated audience, and you're able to share the depth and breadth of your expertise in a way that the mainstream, you want to speak like a 10-year-old in the mainstream. In the B2B or trade press, you can go really geek out and deep dive into all your stuff. And also like people who are industry experts, not industry experts, sorry, decision makers who are, going, oh, we're going to hire that person, we're going to hire Amber. They are reading the industry press, or the people who are booking people to go on for their summits or stages. They're reading who's featured in the industry press. So it's, I think people underestimate that impact as well because they're too busy going,
Absolutely.
I want to be on BBC Breakfast or the bigger places or This Morning or ever. And it's like, it's not either or, it's both, but just don't underestimate that section
The
of the
power of that. You're hitting your ideal audience directly, aren't you?
yeah,
Whereas I suppose you're still hitting that through, BBC News or whatever programs you're on television or in the press or whatever it is. You're still hitting them, but diluted with people who absolutely aren't your ideal,
yeah.
clients. They aren't your ideal audience. So you're directly hitting those people. So I think strategically, it sounds like having both is a great
Having
opportunity.
both, and often I've heard stories from my American counterparts as well that they got into the B2B press and then they'd been like one lady, I can't remember if it was Tanya or Tamara. Anyway, they're really amazing women, and they were saying they'd been pitching the Wall Street Journal, this journalist, this tech story, and then they got them in like, I don't know, like Manufacturers Monthly that the Wall Street journalist was reading, and then they were like suddenly like, we're like, yeah, okay, we'll have the interview now. So it kind of actually can lead into the mainstream. It's just people don't necessarily think that that's the way. They always think the mainstream is the way, and I just think that consider both.
And I think the mainstream is probably because that's more what they know.
It is,
From a young age, we're seeing the programs on television, aren't we? We're seeing our parents reading the papers, then probably us reading the papers, and people talking about the papers. And, there won't be many people out there that won't have heard of the Times or the Telegraph or these newspapers or BBC News or This Morning or whatever else. But there'll be a lot of people, even if they work in the industry, that won't realise that there's actually trade magazines out there that would probably get them results quicker and then could potentially lead to, as you say, results in the other way. So Carrie has masterclasses on this. So if you're listening and that is something that actually is resonating with you, do get in touch with her because it sounds like it's an untapped market.
It's a complete untapped market.
Yeah, absolutely. So get yourself in there. Okay, I've totally lost track. We went off on a
I
bit
know,
of a
don't worry.
tangent there,
You do
as we do.
like,
But it's all good stuff. And I think it's important, isn't it, for people to understand, the pros and cons, because there is of everything, is there, of being in the
of it.
media.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and I think it's really important to be aware of it, isn't it? Because it's kind of
Absolutely.
I think it's part of my job to say no to certain people if I don't feel
Hmm.
they're ready, because it's kind of it's not, so that's why I'm really cautious about certain people, because I just think that there's got to be a right fit. And you've also, it's not just that, you've got to work with people who you resonate with and are your cup of tea, because I'm not everybody's cup of tea, and that's great, because like there's so many other talented wonderful PRs out there, that might be more suited. So it's, you've got to get the, once you have the right person in your corner, then it's going to work more, it's more likely to work, isn't it? Whereas if you haven't,
Absolutely.
it's just going to be
Absolutely.
jarring, and that's not going to help you get the ROI that you were looking for.
Exactly. You've only got to look at Sally, haven't you? When you just said about, or was it 29 TV and 25 press? I probably got that the wrong number.
Yeah,
News.
no,
That's
it's right.
that's a
Yeah,
lot of numbers. That's a lot of
a
in a
lot of
year. That's a
people.
lot of publicity, and that's because the two of you have obviously worked together for so long. But it's actually because you blend, you
We
connect,
do
you've got the
connect. On,
same.
I wanted to say
Yeah.
sort of a really good story. So her last year, so because this is everybody, because it might resonate with a few, might be useful. This is another story about Sally. So last year she brought a book out called the Getting of Resilience from the Inside Out, and she's a regular on BBC Radio London on the Eddie Nestor show. And she's like, "What's the strategy with the books, Carrie?" And I was like, "Wow, this is what I think." Because everybody's got a book and they want to go on the radio and talk about the book, right? And I get it. And I said, "No, let's be counterintuitive here. What would be best was that let's, yeah, mention it to the producers really casually when you go on next, but don't like make a big hoo-ha about it. Just play it cool, play it down." And she went on to Eddie's show, and he was like, they were doing their usual banter, and then they talk about like the news stories of the day, because that's the feature she goes on, and they
Mhm.
have this like, he has quite heated debates with Sally. It's like they're in a couple, they're having this argument. It's really funny. It's very playful and funny. And right at the end, and he said, "Oh, a little bird tells me you've got a book out. You'll have to come back on next week and talk about it." And I was like, boom. So she went on like the next week, and she talked about her book, and he just kept mentioning her book, her book, her book, because we didn't force the agenda. And I think this is the thing that it's like with anything, isn't it? The more you make it a big deal, the more pressure you feel and other people feel. So if you play it a bit cooler, then and that was, that was a really big win. So he was, he really, really mentioned it.
Amazing. I mean, but that's what they say about things like networking, isn't it? Don't snog on the first date type thing. The
Mm.
less you throw things in people's face, the more you just talk and connect, the more curious they get and want to know about you. So the more they ask you, and that's when you're able to share in a way that they're ready to listen rather than just take it away. So that's an amazing, absolutely
It
amazing,
was really funny.
amazing win. Yeah, amazing, amazing. And I think that's the thing, isn't it? A lot of people launch a book and they put a press release out there, don't they? Out goes a press release, and that's it.
Yeah.
And that's
It,
a shame, isn't it?
it's a shame because people, if you really understand how the media works, you can tie your book into the media ongoingly. You could just bring it up to date and make it relevant to what's happening in the media kind of forever, really. And you don't really need to update your book either. You can just tie it back in, tie it back in, tie it back in. It's just that with a bit of creative thinking, but people don't really think about that. Like you're saying, they just think ahead of the book, I'm going to put a press release out. When the book's been launched, I'm going to put a press release out. Oh, now it's launched. I don't need to do anything. It's not relevant. It's dead. And it's not true, because obviously there are things like the Sunday Times list and the New York Times bestseller list that, I think it's the first 2 or 3 weeks of the book launch
Uh-huh.
to get so many sales. Right. Okay. There is that, and that stays. But that,
Mhm.
and there's like certain logical, like structured plan to do that, but there's still exceptions to that rule, but generally that's what it is. So get it if that's what you're going for. But for everybody else who doesn't really want to go for those kind of milestones or markers, you can just keep tying your book back in with a bit of creative thinking. That's why I've created these PR toolkits, because it helps people do it themselves in their own time. And like newsjack on the news, jump on what's happening currently to like to what the content of their book, because there's always an angle, but it's just you've got to train yourself to think like the journalist and like the media, and then you can keep tying it in, because the chances are that there's going to be something that you can share an opinion about that will can link back to your book.
Exactly that. The book is your biggest or can be used correctly, the biggest asset that you've got within your business, can't it? You
Absolutely.
spend months, years for some people writing and putting all of your everything that's up here in your head into words. And so many people do that and then promote it for a while and then share it occasionally and think that's it. But there's so much more you could do with it if it's used correctly.
Yeah, I mean, I think it, like you say, it's a massive, it's a potential asset, isn't it? It's like just
Absolutely,
got to let people
absolutely.
know about it consistently. It's
100%,
not invariant.
100%. There's some people out there that I know that some of people who do really, really well in the businesses, and they will all say that their book is the thing that gets them their leads. And that doesn't take anything, does it? It's out there. It's on Amazon or wherever Waterstones or wherever you're selling your book. The book is doing the legwork for you, but you've got to do the promotion bit at the top
Which is
end.
why if you
Yeah.
marry like what we talked about earlier, like the B2B press with the book, because there's going to be
Uh-huh.
industry specific,
Hmm.
targeted industry publication or even podcast that they'll be like, oh wow, that's like, one of my clients has got a book rediscovered about midlife women. And I'm just like, there's so many midlife women podcasts and publications. For just an example, it's if you go for those angles as well. I mean, that's you just got to put the effort in. You get what you get in what you put out, don't you? It's
Exactly. Absolutely. 100%. Right. We are starting to run out of time, unfortunately. And I know me and Carrie could literally talk all day.
we
We
could.
absolutely could. We absolutely could. But before we finish, at the end of every single episode, I ask my guests to share with us a top tip. So, Carrie, what's your top tip for our listeners?
My top tip is to remember that somebody you really admire who's perhaps a bit further along in the journey that you want to, maybe has a higher media profile than you, they started somewhere. And if they can do it, you can do it.
Love that. Absolutely love that. If they can do it, you can do it. And finally, if any of our listeners want to learn more about you, where's the best place for them to come and find you?
Well,
Well, do I need to roll up my sleeves for this
yeah,
list?
because I'm just like, well, it depending on when they listen to the podcast, it could be
Okay.
like theblompreneur.com or it could have shifted to moonlitpr.com. So
Okay. So try both.
try both. Yeah, try both.
Try both. Yep. I will pop obviously the link in the show notes. And once Carrie has swapped over to the updated website, she will hopefully let me know and I'll make sure just the correct link is in the show notes for you. Anyway, so Carrie, thank you so much for joining us. It has been an absolute pleasure as ever chatting. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have.
I always enjoy chatting to you. You know that. It's always
Absolutely,
wonderful.
absolutely. So if anybody wants PR, go and look Carrie up. She is phenomenal at what she does. But for now, thank you for listening. We will see you next time.